Be sure to check out MythVisionPodcast.com. Help MythVision grow, guys. Become a Patreon member. You guys will get early access to all of my videos when I'm done editing them. Also, it's a small community where you guys can message me your questions and talk to me in private. You guys can donate also through PayPal. Join our social media links down in the description. We have Twitter and Facebook groups. Help the community of MythVision grow. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Hit that bell button so you're notified every time I do a live video and you don't miss any of my content. Like this video and comment your thoughts below because I want to know what you think about all of these things.
We are MythVision. Welcome back to MythVision Podcast. Your host, Derek Lambert, the militaristic Jesus. Jesus being a bad, taking the sword to Rome and all those good stories we hear from some of our Roman provenance buddies about the early movements of Christianity and that maybe there was a rebel Jesus at the core. Today, I have Dr. Samuel Zinner, PhD, guys. I forgot to mention this in our earliest shows, and he made me aware of it, and he's so humble. He's like, look, it doesn't matter to me. And I'm like, no, it does matter, because you having credentials is so important to let people know that you have these, if you will, this backing education that supports the idea that you know ancient history, modern history, linguistics, and language in these time frames. And one of your specialties that we're going to talk about today is dealing with the biblical narrative and stuff. And I wanted to ask you, just to kick it off, was Jesus a badass?
Well, was he a militaristic Messiah of the type that scholars like Brandon wrote about?
Right.
So this is a well-known motif. Right? Well, first, we always have to see. Well, I don't know, right? But I can sift through the literature and try to establish sort of a scale of probabilities, right, for the various claims that we see, the various stories that we see, mostly in the Gospels. In any case, if you read the Gospels and the book of Acts, you'd see, before I go directly to this point, let me prepare the way, right, with a more well-known argument. That is, that when you look at the book of Acts, when certain disciples of Jesus start to missionize among Gentiles, this gave rise to a huge controversy, right, among the followers of Jesus. And this is like, how the point being that if Jesus had taught the disciples, right, that that there would be a mission to the Gentiles, and this is how you are going to deal with the questions of circumcision and kashrut, right, and all the kosher laws, the halakha, Jewish religious law, he would have prepared them. But if you read the book of Acts, it's clear that Jesus had never envisioned a mission to the Gentiles. He never said anything about it. And that was why there was great controversy and arguments about it. And so, for instance, now, if you go to the Gospel, it's like the earliest one, the Gospel of Mark, and Jesus basically saying, actually, Jesus doesn't say this, but Mark Jesus, well, all right, you can eat anything you want to eat. This impression that Jesus taught that you can eat anything you want to eat as a Jew. You don't have to follow the dietary rules, the kashrut rules. This doesn't make any sense historically either, because right in the book of Acts, it's a big bone of contention. If Jesus had taught that, there would have been no arguments in the early Jesus movement, as depicted in the book of Acts, right? And granted, you have to really be careful with the book of Acts. A lot of it is not historical, probably even some of it was not meant to be taken historically. But in any case, it's the same thing now when we address the issue of militarism, the traditional Jewish understanding of Messiah, which is based on the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, right? The prophets, is that the Messiah would be a military leader, basically, and a king, right? So he's royal and he's military, right? He leads armies. Right. So now, if you look in the book of Acts and the beginning of the book of Acts, and also let's say like Luke 24, the final chapter of the Gospel of Luke, you will see that the disciples are all under the impression that Jesus is going to establish, right, the messianic government, the kingdom. Right, so they're thinking of him as the traditional Jewish messianic militaristic Messiah. All right, so now if Jesus, for the whole year of his ministry, when he was going through the countrysides of Galilee and Judea, if he had been criticizing this idea and rejecting it, how in the world could his disciples then, right, still have this idea to the very end, right? And even during the resurrection appearances that Luke talks about in his gospel and in the book of Acts, right? So to me, I would say, it looks like, well, this not the only, but a logical explanation would be that, well, right, if we take this historically, then this Jesus would have just never have criticized or contested, let alone rejected the traditional idea of a militaristic Messiah, which after all is the idea promoted in the Hebrew Bible, right? So it's not something that evil Jews, right, were teaching, right, after the closure of the Bible, for instance. This is something that the prophets taught, right? So, right, that's the first point to make, right?
If you don't mind, I just want to say to simplify it, because it's very complex and there's a lot of detail here. Ultimately, like David, a king, also a prophet-like figure, or well, obviously the prophets would be like Samuel, Nathan, and such, but Jesus fits this bill of being a king, a leader, a prophet-like figure, like a lot of these pictures into one, but really the messianic type of person, whether he claimed to be it himself or not in actual history. What they thought of him was that he was this. And when we try to look at what he actually was without getting into the mythologizing, if we take the historicist approach and we see that there's mythologizing that takes place, and we try to go to the most primitive Jesus that there was, a historical guy, at the roots, it's not implausible to suppose this guy had this same type of Hebrew Tanakh mentality that we see in the prophets, that we see in the Hebrew scriptures, where they're going to kick the uncircumcised butts of the enemies of God, the other nations, and in some way, shape, or form, whether I hear that there's the idea that angels would come and assist them in a battle against them, but oftentimes they had to start the war, they had to initiate it. And the failure was that this guy that was supposedly the Messiah in their eyes just up and gets crucified by the Romans, and it's done. And it's like, hold on, what? No, that wasn't supposed to happen. And but was this guy a military leader? Was he a rebel? Was he possibly someone who was going to arouse the Israelites, or a sect of them, if you will, to try and get the whole nation on board to fight Rome, the enemy of Israel? But it wasn't just that these human people were enemies. They also had they were very superstitious in the terms of they believed in spirits, demons, angels, those type of things. I think at least the demons, it appears, may have been something like Enochian type literature, spirits of the underworld, or whatever, if you will. They did have this superstition about them, but was he possibly a sword wielding Jew who was telling others, get ready for battle, we're going to fight them?
Well, I think Brandon, had made a pretty good argument, and others have built on him, right? With that there are vestiges of this militaristic Jesus that we can still see in the Gospels, right? So not everything was brushed over, right? So you have sayings like, well, I didn't come to bring peace, I came to bring war and the sword, right? So I mean, how do you spiritualize that, right? And then there's the story about towards the end, right before Jesus is arrested. All right, sell your cloak, sell whatever you have, get some swords, well, here's one, here's another one. He says, all right, that's enough. All right, so what's that about? Right, so he doesn't tell them to get rid of the swords. He's, so there do appear to be these vestiges of, militaristic mindset. And by militaristic mindset, I just mean the traditional Hebrew Bible mindset of the prophets. This is how they thought of the Messiah, right? So in that sense, sure, you could say that there are an argument can be made. There are definitely sayings there, right? That the idea of this the peace-loving Jesus, that's not the whole story, is it? I've not come to bring peace to the world, but a sword and war. And so,
Yeah, and I know people who do try to spiritualize that stuff, that do try to the sword is the double-edged sword, which is the word of God, like
but doesn't the word of God bring peace? But anyway, look, he was arrested and executed for the crime of sedition, right?
Yeah, and
so
I mean,
this is the big embarrassment, right, to the early Christians, right? In the eyes of Rome, right? He was a seditionist. He was executed as such. Right? And here's something from the Gospel of John that's very interesting. Despite the fact that the Gospel of John is written like a century after the time of the story that it's telling, right? There you have something that I think is probably not literally historical, but the idea in it is probably historical. And that is that Caiaphas, the high priest, justifies the execution by arguing that, well, it's better that one man perish than that the Romans come and destroy the temple and the whole nation.
why?
Right. So
Great question.
The fear was that, and this is well documented in Josephus. We know this, especially at the times of the three great annual festivals. All right, this was a time when sedition would usually be worked up and was rife and in the air, right? And so, especially these times, had to be put down. So definitely Jesus was being feared as a seditionist, which is exactly the picture that Josephus gives of John the Baptist. Because Herod had John the Baptist executed. He doesn't tell us how, beheading or what, he doesn't tell us how, but he says he had him executed because he feared that because the people were listening to him and revered him as a prophet, that he could foment rebellion.
Wow.
So this is the same picture apparently that we have of Jesus in the Gospels.
They have really manipulated the way we view this thing. I mean, it is so, I never would have thought this way as a Christian to consider even investigating this or looking at it this way. I think it's interesting because now all these passages, it makes me want to reconsider how I looked at a lot of passages that I've always cherished and looked at. Oh, look, he turns the world upside down. Look, oh man, all men will come and follow him. Like this idea that we got to stop this guy. What he's doing is really making waves through the communities. He's getting the nation aroused. Like there's an idea that we got to stop this guy because he's really making a lot of people. I think he got kicked. Anyway, in the meantime, oh, there he is. You glitched out for a second. I think Satan's trying to screw us over.
We're back.
Yeah, Satan tried to stop you from hearing my message of light. No, I'm just kidding. But I said,
all right. All right. Where did I cut out?
Did you stop? Were you in the middle of talking? Because I ended up started talking because you were quiet, and I was saying a lot of passages come to light that I previously held cherished but never viewed them in this perception. And those are passages where it sounds like, look, all men are going to go follow him. Look at how many people are following him. He's turning the world upside down. Like as if this guy's really making waves and they got to put it into him because they know what this is going to do. They don't, maybe some Jews didn't buy into this eschatological apocalyptic climax where they thought, no, we're really going to win. They probably saw the military structure of Rome and were more Sadducee-like and said, look, I don't believe in the same
That's right.
climatic apocalyptic end, and they're going to get us all killed.
Just
So
like
we need to
Philo.
stop. Right.
Like Philo of Alexandria would have that approach. He's not interested in the Messiah. It's simply not. But in any case, what I was saying was that the Gospels, right, when they have Caiaphas say that it's better that one man perished than that the entire nation be destroyed along with the temple, right? So the idea there is that Jesus is being perceived as a seditionist, right? And this is the same picture that we get of John the Baptizer in Josephus,
Right.
According to Josephus, John the Baptizer, Herod had him executed because he was afraid that because of the popularity of John, who was revered as a prophet almost, or literally, that John could end up fomenting rebellion.
Right.
Right. And so why do we not want rebellion? Because Rome can come in and destroy the entire nation. Right? So what we see in the Gospels regarding Jesus is, fits that model. And before I've talked about how Josephus, where we have the testimony about Jesus, no matter what it said, the placement is interesting because it's like sandwiched right in between these accounts of sedition against Rome, Jewish sedition against Rome. So that's congruent with Jesus at least having the hope, right, that his ministry, whether or not he thought of himself as the Messiah, but that his ministry would bring in the Messiah or the messianic era, the kingdom of God, right, where God would be the only ruler, right, rather than Rome.
So, if you don't mind, Dr. Zinner, I want to present something I thought was interesting and tell me your thoughts on it. I did an interview recently with Tim O'Neill, and he has historyforatheists, I think, .com. And he pretty much was describing the historical Jesus he believed was apocalyptic. He thinks that there's he believes that it's ridiculous to think otherwise. But ultimately, he said, what we have is we have an interesting kind of methodology that's used here to realize that there's an issue with having Jesus being baptized by John. And the issue was that this guy was initially actually baptized by John, and there wasn't really any problem with this in the Markan tradition. But then you get to Matthew and Luke, and this is why they have a birth narrative, is to fix the problem with, okay, if in Jewish tradition they say that the baptizer is superior to the one being baptized. And this idea is like, we can't have John be bigger than our Jesus. So what they do is they have the narrative where Jesus is in the belly and so is John, and he recognizes, like he pays homage at birth, like bowing in the belly of his mother Martha to Mary and saying, oh yes, you are the Messiah. Like John's already saying, you're bigger than me from the get-go. And this is to downplay when he gets baptized by John, that really this is just part of what has to happen, not because I'm better. And John really capitalizes on it by saying, I cannot even unbuckle his sandal. Like it's so obvious. And so he says this to him gives, I mean, you could put a fictional character, as mythicists will say, into the narrative, and I get it. Dr. Price would probably say this is fictional insertion of this messianic figure. However, if he was historical, this is interesting because he's in the same vein as these John the Baptist type people. And him baptizing Jesus, it seems like there's a problem here, because if you're inventing this story, why would you have him initially being baptized by John in Mark, and now you're fixing this polemic? You're fixing the problem in the rest of the Gospels by trying to make, oh no, shoot, he's God, so he can't be lower than John or under John. We got to have him saying somehow looking better, birth narrative, or I cannot even loosen. Why am I baptizing you? And this is the Lamb of God who comes to take away the sins, all these things. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, my presumption would be the best way to interpret these problematic texts with all necessary qualifications would be that Jesus is presented in the earliest sources as a disciple of John. So he started out as a disciple of John the Baptizer. Paul says something interesting. Corinthians, I believe, that when he uses the term baptize, if an individual baptizes someone, for instance, if Peter baptizes someone, they are baptized to Peter. That is, they are of Peter's school. They are now a follower of Peter, right? And so this would fit the John the Baptizer model, right? So if you're baptized by John, you're a disciple of John. You're identifying, you're joining his movement, right? But the Gospels would imply that at some point, Jesus then broke away from John the Baptizer's group to go his own way. And I think Christian theologians exaggerate that breakaway. It doesn't have to have, you don't have to have some great conflict that occurred. It could have been that Jesus just felt the need to go off on its own, right? And start his own group. He didn't necessarily have to have any big disagreements with John to do that. So in any case, he starts off as the disciple of John. And certainly, as each gospel is written and published, right, the embarrassment deepens, right? And right, until you get to John, right, where he doesn't even mention the baptism. Sort of implied if you already know the story, but he doesn't come out outright and say that John baptized Jesus. Certainly, this was something that disturbed early Christians, at least the ones who were writing these gospel texts.
Yeah, I definitely think
it may have been too, right? That if according to Mark, at some point after John the Baptizer was executed, it says that there were some people who believed that Jesus was John the Baptizer, risen from the dead. What does that mean? Well, it certainly wouldn't mean the way that people today would think of that, right? Because those people who were believing that Jesus was John the Baptizer raised from the dead knew that John the Baptizer and Jesus were of about the same age, right? So the idea there was more along the lines of almost like transmigration or soul wandering, right? Or reincarnation, right? Sort of a misleading term, but that's sort of the idea at work there, that the spirit of someone could be released at death, and that could wander into someone who's already alive and an adult, right? And it could happen at birth. That was the belief about John the Baptizer. That apparently, I would say that the followers of John the Baptizer believed that he had been born. He was sort of a reincarnation, quote unquote, of the prophet Elijah. And that's why, right, Jesus actually affirms that in the Gospel of Matthew, but the Gospel of John denies it. So there's a flat contradiction between those two Gospels about the belief that John was Elijah, right? So that is sort of like we use the term reincarnation. I mean, it's the spirit of Elijah that incarnated in this man, John the Baptizer, right? And so some people were believing that when John the Baptizer died, his spirit, that spirit of Elijah, then drifted into Jesus, right? And then became the dominant spiritual energy operating in Jesus and through Jesus. So this is why the stories of Elijah, right, have been applied to Jesus throughout the Gospels.
Interesting.
Many scholars.
I've never heard of that way, so to speak. Okay. Is there any other thing you can think of for the rebel Jesus, this militaristic Jesus? I mean, one thing I'd like to touch on before we go, if you can't really think of much, is the kingship idea. I mean, he is called a king quite a bit, and why? Why is he a king? Is he goes to Pontius Pilate. Pilate says, "Are you the king of the Jews? You have said I am," or my kingdom is not of this world. They take it somewhere else, of course, things like that. But he's constantly referred as this royal type king of the Davidic line. Does this help give weight to him being more of a militaristic, nationalistic Jew?
Well, it's called king, right? Because this is the Tanakh, the prophets, right? This is how they portray the Messiah, a descendant of David. Ezekiel says it will be David. So how? What, reincarnation, or David is resurrected, comes out of the sky? No, I mean, no one worked this out. There was no need to, right, in Second Temple Judaism. But all these different ideas were possibilities. But definitely all the prophets call the Messiah a royal figure, a king. And he is King David. I will be King David. So that's why Jesus is called king. But of course, as you know, the problem is that with the crucifixion, that didn't materialize. So then you're left with two options. You can call him a spiritual king. That's what John is doing, right? Say, my kingdom is not of this world. Or you could say he will be king, right? After his spirit somehow becomes effective again on the earth, right? How some act of God, and so that he can then fulfill the messianic prophecies of the Tanakh, and then, right, he will be Messiah. So you can say he's king in anticipation, or a fancy word that New Testament scholars use, it's proleptic, right? He's proleptically viewed as Messiah, not already, but it's certainly they believe that it was a sure thing that was going to happen. He will return and then fulfill all those prophecies, and at that time he would be the Messiah. But that was not the way Paul looked at things, right? He had a more spiritual view of everything, and for him, Jesus is already the Messiah, right? In any case, that's what the king label is about. It's come straight from the prophets of the Hebrew Bible. That's all that's about.
Dr. Zinner, this is fascinating information. Obviously, we just barely touched on this particular topic. Definitely people need to go read Brandon and S.J. Brandon and others in this vein, or if you will, in the school of thought. My good friend Dave Allen. I have a lot of friends that are actually into this, the Rebel Jesus idea, and part of a Facebook group that I'm in and stuff. Is there any closing comments you'd like to make on this topic?
Sure. Just very briefly, we can't go into the details, but in another talk, I discussed my view that the Testimonium Flavianum is authentic through and through. It's just been totally misunderstood. Josephus is not saying that Jesus was Messiah, for instance. This is a misinterpretation. But what Josephus is implying to his Greco-Roman pagan audience, not a Jewish audience, is that he places this in between accounts of different Jewish seditions against Rome. And so for Josephus, writing towards the end of the first century, the Common Era, Jesus was a seditionist figure, right? And so, does that prove that he was? No, but that's just as early, in fact, I think earlier than the Gospels, any of the Gospels. And so that is congruent with what the Gospels present, the story they present, that Jesus was executed for sedition.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Samuel Zinner. Make sure you guys go down in the description, check out his links. If you guys want to help him out, you guys can personally reach out to him on that link. He has his email and stuff like that. So you got to do a little work to find it. All right. So if you really want to help this gentleman, please go there and you guys can contact him personally. I really do appreciate you joining me here on this show. I hope we can do some more on this for sure.
Thank you, Dad.
Thank you. And don't forget, we are MythVision.